Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be taking a look at U.S. immigration.
Okay.
We're going to be focusing on this academic article.
Right.
It's called Immigration in the USA, Historical Impact, Economic Implications, and Future Prospects.
Sounds comprehensive.
It is, and we're hoping to kind of, give more nuanced view of immigration than just what you see in the headlines.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you know
It's important.
that almost half of all Fortune 500 companies
Yeah.
were founded by immigrants or their children?
That's a pretty powerful statistic.
It is.
It speaks to the impact.
We'll be talking about all kinds of things, historical moments, economic impacts, the whole picture of immigration in the U.S.
It's a big topic. I think it's essential to recognize that immigration is kind of woven into the very fabric of the United States
Definitely.
from the very beginning.
Yeah.
The colonists themselves were immigrants seeking a new life, and that's continued through today with people arriving from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's really shaped not just the country's development, but also its identity.
Right. And the article actually starts way back in pre-colonial times, looking at, the arrival of European settlers
Right.
and the impact they had on the Native Americans who were already here.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And the impact on Native Americans was pretty devastating. They were forced off their land. Their cultures were nearly erased.
Right.
And this was through a combination of things, warfare, treaties that were kind of forced on them, and policies like the Indian Removal Act. That really had a profound impact.
So then the article takes us through kind of the evolution of immigration.
Right.
From, those early colonial days all the way through the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And, you could really see these distinct waves, like, distinct groups coming over different times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The 19th century, for example, saw a huge wave of immigrants.
Yeah.
A lot of them were coming from places like Ireland and Germany and Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm.
And they were driven by things like famine and political unrest in their home countries.
Right.
And then at the same time, you also had a significant number of Chinese laborers coming over.
Mm-hmm.
And they played a huge role in building the Transcontinental Railroad.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they faced immense discrimination,
Of course.
violence, and eventually exclusionary policies like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
Right. And as we move into the 20th century, you start to see those immigration policies really become more restrictive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A prime example of that is the Immigration Act of 1924.
Right.
And this act, it set quotas that favored immigrants from Northern European countries.
Okay.
But it severely limited immigration from, other parts of the world, Asia, Africa, Southern Europe. And that really changed the makeup of immigration to the United States.
Yeah.
And these quotas, based on national origin, weren't abolished until 1965 with the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act.
Yeah.
Which is what really opened the door to the more diverse patterns of immigration that we see today.
Right. So then the article really kind of dives into one of the biggest, most debated topics when it comes to immigration, which is economics.
Right, the economic impacts.
Yeah.
It's a huge discussion.
Yeah.
And one of the most talked about aspects is the impact of immigration on labor markets.
Mm.
And historically, immigrants have played, a really vital role in filling those jobs that are, in sectors like agriculture, construction, service industries.
Yeah.
Jobs that, for whatever reason, native-born workers either can't or won't take.
Right. Like think of agriculture, for example.
Exactly.
Relies heavily on Mexican and Central American workers who are often doing really demanding work.
Absolutely.
In some pretty difficult conditions.
It's tough work.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are concerns about the impact of immigrant labor on wages for native-born workers.
Right.
Critics will say that it can drive down wages, but proponents of immigration will say that immigrants often take on jobs that would otherwise just go unfilled.
Right.
And that they actually contribute to the overall economic productivity.
Yeah.
So it's a complex issue.
It is. But the article also points out that immigrants have made these huge contributions to entrepreneurship and innovation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it actually says that about 45% of Fortune 500 companies
Wow.
were founded by immigrants or their children.
That's incredible.
Think of companies like, Google.
Right.
or Tesla,
Yeah.
both founded by immigrants who brought their talents to the U.S.
Yeah.
So it really shows you that entrepreneurial spirit and innovation within these
It
communities.
really does.
But I think that whole cushion of, are they an economic burden? Are they a benefit? It really remains.
A big question.
Yeah, this huge debate.
Yeah. And the opponents of high levels of immigration will say, look, they're straining our public resources, like healthcare, education. They're not contributing enough in taxes. But then, of course, you have studies that show that over the long term, immigrants often contribute more in taxes than they consume in public services.
Yeah.
They're actually helping counterbalance the effects of our aging population because they're bolstering the workforce.
Right.
They're contributing to Social Security. So it's a multifaceted issue.
It is. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, the article then looks at how immigration has shaped American identity.
Okay.
And it uses these two metaphors that I think most people are familiar with.
Right.
The melting pot.
Okay.
And the salad bowl.
Right.
And, the melting pot kind of suggests this blending of all the different cultures into one unified American identity. But then the salad bowl is more like, you have these distinct cultures. They're all coexisting.
Right.
And they're enriching society. But they keep their unique characteristics.
Right. They remain distinct.
Yeah. And so it's really this tension between assimilation and multiculturalism.
Right.
Which has been kind of this recurring theme throughout U.S. history.
It has been, and the article doesn't shy away from the darker side of that history either.
Right.
It talks about nativism, xenophobia, and historically, immigration has often been met with fear, resentment.
Yeah.
Think back to the 19th century. You had the rise of the Know-Nothing Party. It was fueled by anxieties over the influx of Irish and German Catholic immigrants.
Right.
And we see similar trends even in, the late 20th, early 21st century with anti-immigrant rhetoric targeting groups like Mexicans, Muslims.
Right.
And this kind of rhetoric, it often portrays immigrants as criminals or economic threats.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately shapes public perception and can influence policy decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then, you have all of these immigrant groups that have overcome these challenges, and they've successfully integrated into American society and made significant contributions.
Yeah. Many immigrant groups, especially those fleeing oppression, they come here with a strong sense of patriotism.
Yeah.
A real commitment to their adopted country. The Vietnamese who arrived after the Vietnam War, the Cubans who fled Castro's regime.
Yeah.
They've shown incredible loyalty to the U.S., and they've really enriched the cultural tapestry of the nation.
Yeah.
But of course, integration isn't always easy.
Right.
It's not always guaranteed.
Right. Now, the article then takes a look at kind of the political and legal complexities around immigration in the U.S.
Right.
And it points out that U.S. immigration policy has been subject to these frequent shifts because, political priorities change.
They do, yeah.
So, you think about the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. Ronald Reagan signed that. And it really sought to reduce undocumented immigration. But at the same time, offered amnesty to those who were already here.
Yeah.
Which, stands in stark contrast to, say, the Trump administration's policies, which were focused on, restricting immigration.
Right.
Like lowering refugee intake, building the wall on the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah, and the Trump administration also had those travel bans.
Right.
Which were largely targeted at, citizens from Muslim-majority countries.
Right.
And that raised concerns about, religious discrimination and kind of the balance between national security and individual rights.
Right. And then, the Biden administration has kind of come in and tried to reverse some of those policies and increase those refugee quotas.
Right.
Create a path to citizenship, especially for those protected under DACA.
Yeah. So another really key element of that political landscape is that conflict between federal and state authorities.
Right.
Over these so-called sanctuary cities. Right.
Places like San Francisco, New York, they have policies in place that limit their cooperation with federal immigration enforcement.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to deporting undocumented immigrants.
Right.
And that really highlights just how complex this issue of immigration enforcement is.
Yeah.
And how many different viewpoints there are on how to handle undocumented populations.
And then, the DREAM Act and DACA.
Right.
Those have really been focal points.
Yeah.
in these recent immigration debates.
Absolutely. DACA was established in 2012 under the Obama administration, and it was designed to protect undocumented immigrants who came here as children from deportation.
Right.
It gave them temporary legal status, work permits. And these dreamers, as they're called, really highlight the complicated nature of immigration policy.
Right.
You know, those moral and economic arguments surrounding people who were brought here as children and have built their lives here.
Yeah. And the DREAM Act itself, even though there have been so many attempts to pass it, has faced setbacks in Congress.
Yeah.
So DACA recipients are kind of left in limbo,
Right.
facing a really uncertain future.
And, you know, in 2017, the Trump administration tried to rescind DACA,
Right.
which led to a bunch of legal battles.
Yeah.
And although the Supreme Court ultimately blocked that attempt to end the program in 2020, they didn't really rule on its legality.
Yeah.
So its future is still, you know, unclear.
Unclear.
Yeah. And as of 2024, there are about 600,000 DACA recipients still living and working in the U.S. So their contributions are overshadowed by this precarious legal status.
Absolutely. The debate over the DREAM Act and DACA really reflects a broader struggle, I think, within American society about who deserves citizenship and what those criteria should be.
Right.
You know, the experiences of the Dreamers really are a reminder of the human impact of immigration policy. And it raises questions about our commitment to fairness and opportunity and compassion in our approach to immigration.
Definitely. So now let's kind of dive into the social and cultural impact of immigration on immigrant communities themselves.
Okay.
Because it's a lot to navigate.
It is. You know, they're trying to integrate into American society.
Right.
But at the same time, they're facing marginalization.
Yeah.
And some immigrants, they achieve upward mobility, they contribute to the fabric of the nation, but others, they struggle with systemic barriers.
Right.
Things like language barriers, limited access to education, employment discrimination.
Right. Think about, like, a lot of Latin American immigrants.
Yeah.
You know, they play essential roles in construction, agriculture,
Right?
but often face low wages and few opportunities for advancement.
Yeah. They provide vital services, but they're often stuck in these low-paying jobs
Yeah.
with limited chances to move up.
Right. And that kind of economic marginalization can create this cycle of poverty that's hard to break.
It is. It's a real challenge. And you also see these really interesting generational differences within immigrant communities.
Yeah.
You know, first-generation immigrants might grapple with the culture and the language, but then their children, the second generation, they're kind of balancing the expectations of their families with the pressures to assimilate into mainstream American culture.
Right.
And you see this generational shift in everything: language, cultural practices, attitudes towards education, work.
Right. And take Asian American immigrants, for example.
Yeah.
They often face this stereotype of the model minority,
Right.
which can put a lot of pressure on younger generations
It does.
to excel academically and professionally. And that pressure can lead to tension between the first generation, who are emphasizing those cultural traditions, and their kids who are just trying to fit in.
Exactly, yeah. But despite these challenges, immigrants have truly enriched American society.
Oh, absolutely.
They've brought so much to our culture.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from Italian food to Mexican holidays like Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah.
Immigrant cultures have really broadened the American experience. And think about the arts.
Yeah.
They've been so deeply influenced by immigrant communities. Jazz music, for example,
Yeah.
drawing heavily from African-American traditions.
Yeah.
And modern pop culture is full of influences from Latin America, Asia, all over the globe, and even in literature.
Yeah.
You have authors like Shumpo Lahiri and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie
Mhm.
who are bringing those immigrant narratives to the forefront.
Yeah.
And their work really highlights just how dynamic American society is and how it's constantly being shaped by these diverse influences.
Absolutely. But we also can't ignore the fact that the portrayal of immigration isn't always positive.
Right.
Right? You have anti-immigrant sentiments,
Yeah.
the politics of fear, which cloud the narrative and affect public perception and policy decisions.
Absolutely. And the media often portrays immigrants in these very extreme ways. Yeah.
Either they're dangerous criminals or they're these incredibly hardworking people
Right.
striving for a better life. And this dichotomy really shapes the conversation around immigration.
It does.
And these negative portrayals, especially those that paint undocumented immigrants as criminals,
Yeah.
they're often used to justify stricter immigration policies.
Right.
Remember that phrase, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime?
Yeah.
It was really popularized during the 2016 election.
Yeah.
And it's a prime example of rhetoric that fuels that fear and distrust. And that kind of representation can lead to the marginalization of immigrant communities and those harsh policy measures that are enacted in the name of public safety.
Yeah. And immigration has become central to so many political campaigns.
It has.
Especially during those times of economic uncertainty or social change.
Right.
And that was definitely the case in the 2024 presidential election.
Absolutely.
Immigration really shaped the political landscape. It did. The 2024 presidential campaign really saw immigration become like a central issue.
He really did.
Both parties kind of offered these different visions for what immigration should look like in the future.
Yeah.
Trump's campaign really focused on that law and order message.
Right.
Strengthening border security, reducing immigration, both legal and illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And it resonated with people who were, concerned about their jobs, the economy, and those cultural shifts, especially in those areas that were seeing job losses and demographic changes.
Right. And his approach was really built on those policies from his first term.
It was, yeah.
The border wall.
Right.
Reducing the number of refugees admitted to the country.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted stricter enforcement, more border patrol,
right,
and even implementing those technologies like drones and sensors to monitor the border.
Yeah, a lot of surveillance. And his rhetoric often portrayed immigration as a threat.
Yeah.
A threat to national security, a threat to our economic well-being.
Right. He would say undocumented immigrants were responsible for rising crime rates.
Right.
Despite, evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
And he emphasized, protecting American jobs and resources.
America first.
Yeah. Biden, on the other hand, campaigned on that platform of inclusivity.
Yeah.
Advocating for a more humane approach to immigration.
Right.
And a more comprehensive one.
Yeah, he wanted to create pathways to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who met certain requirements, expanding asylum programs, and reversing some of those restrictive measures put in place by Trump.
Right, and his campaign really focused on the positive contributions of immigrants.
It did, yeah.
Highlighting their role in our economy, our culture, innovation. And it resonated with voters who valued compassion.
Yeah.
And saw immigration as a strength.
As a positive force.
Yeah, as a benefit. Yeah.
And one of the biggest differences between the two candidates was their stance on DACA. Oh, yeah.
Trump had tried to end it.
Right.
Biden pledged to protect it and even expand it.
Right, and offer a path to citizenship for dreamers.
Exactly, and that really reflected a fundamental disagreement over immigration's role.
Yeah.
Trump saw it through that lens of security and economic competition.
Right.
Biden emphasized the humanitarian and social benefits.
Right.
And you saw this in their policies as well.
Yeah.
Trump wanted a merit-based system, prioritizing highly skilled workers. And he actually proposed cuts to family-based migration.
He did.
He proposed cuts to the H-1B visa program, which is for skilled workers. And he wanted to limit the number of refugees.
Right.
Biden, on the other hand, wanted to increase that annual refugee cap.
Right.
And streamline the asylum process.
Make it fairer.
Make it more efficient. And he stressed the need to address those root causes of migration.
Yeah.
Things like poverty, violence in Central America.
And he wanted to do it through foreign aid and diplomacy.
Right. And I think the election really showed how divided we are.
It did.
On this issue. Biden won, but those close margins in several key states show how important immigration is.
It's still a central issue.
Yeah, it's not going away.
And this debate over immigration policy really shows that we're still trying to figure out who we are, what our values are in this globalized world.
Right.
It raises questions about, citizenship, belonging,
the
American dream.
And then the article shifts to look at the challenges facing the U.S. immigration system today.
Right.
And, one of the most pressing is undocumented immigration, especially along the southern border.
Yeah.
It's become this focal point for anxieties.
It has.
About immigration.
Yeah.
We've seen the images.
Yeah.
Overcrowded detention centers, family separations, humanitarian crises.
It's really sparked outrage and calls for reform.
Yeah.
And, that zero tolerance policy under Trump, separating those families.
Thousands of kids.
Yeah.
it was widely condemned,
It was.
seen as cruel,
Inhumane.
a violation of human rights.
Absolutely.
And so much of the focus has been on border security,
It has, yeah.
building walls, using surveillance,
Right.
more border patrol.
Yeah.
But those measures have been criticized too.
They have.
Expensive, environmental impact, violating the rights of migrants.
Right. And Biden has really faced that challenge of balancing compassion with, effective border management.
Yeah.
He's tried to reverse some of those harsher policies.
Right.
But there's been this surge in arrivals.
Yeah.
So it's created logistical challenges.
Right. And he's getting criticized from both sides.
It is. It's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah. It shows how complex this issue is.
It does, yeah. All these factors driving migration.
Right.
Poverty, violence, climate change, the desire for economic opportunity.
Right.
It shows that just focusing on enforcement isn't enough.
It's not. And the article also talks about refugee and asylum policy,
Yeah.
which is changing too.
It is, yeah. The number of people displaced globally is at record levels
It is.
due to conflict, persecution, climate change.
Right.
And that's putting pressure on asylum systems everywhere.
Yeah. And Trump really reduced the number of refugees admitted to the U.S.
He did.
Yeah.
Set historically low caps.
Yeah.
Made it harder for people to even enter the country.
Right. Biden has tried to reverse that.
He has.
Increase the refugee cap.
Right.
Make the asylum process more humane, more accessible.
Right.
But it's not without challenges.
No, the system's backlogged.
Yeah.
The surge at the borders strained resources. And it raises questions about, our obligation.
Right.
We signed international conventions on refugee protection.
Yeah.
So how do we respond to these humanitarian crises?
Right, right. And the article points out that climate change is becoming a bigger and bigger driver of migration.
And it is, particularly from Central America.
Yeah. Extreme weather, droughts, rising sea levels, they're displacing communities, leading to instability,
Right.
forcing people to seek refuge.
Right, and Biden has acknowledged that.
He has.
That climate change is playing a role.
Yeah.
And he's proposed addressing it through foreign aid, development programs, diplomacy. But, some people say that's not enough.
Right.
That we need more comprehensive immigration reform.
Right. That addresses the legal and humanitarian needs of these climate migrants.
Right. And to really understand all these different experiences
Yeah.
and challenges that immigrants face, the article looks at some specific groups.
Okay.
So Mexican and Latin American immigration.
Right.
It has a long and complex history.
It does.
Mexicans in particular have played this essential role in the U.S. economy.
Absolutely.
Agriculture, construction. But they've faced discrimination,
They have.
exploitation, and all this rhetoric about border security has often targeted them.
Portraying them as a threat,
Yeah.
despite their contributions.
Yeah. And then you have Asian American immigration, which has also been marked by both welcome and exclusion.
Right. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
Right.
One of the first major attempts to restrict immigration based on ethnicity.
Yeah.
Reflecting that anti-Asian sentiment at the time. But then the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965
Right.
opened the doors to a new wave of Asian immigrants.
It did.
And today, they're
Yeah.
one of the fastest growing groups
They are.
in the country.
Yeah.
They've made huge contributions.
Absolutely. Technology, medicine, education.
But they still face challenges.
They do.
The model minority myth,
Right.
which, hides the struggles that exist within those communities.
It does. And then you have Muslim immigrants whose experiences have been shaped by 9/11.
Yeah.
The aftermath led to increased scrutiny, surveillance, suspicion,
Yeah.
a lot of fear and mistrust directed at those communities.
Right. And then the travel bans under Trump,
Yeah.
targeting those Muslim majority countries.
Right.
It just exacerbated that feeling of alienation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But despite that, Muslim immigrants have made valuable contributions.
They have. Healthcare, technology, education, the arts.
Mm-hmm.
So looking ahead, the article examines the future of immigration,
Okay.
and the demographics suggest it's going to continue to be a major driver
Of what?
of population growth
Okay.
and economic vitality
In the coming decades.
in the coming decades, yeah.
Okay.
And with our aging population and declining birth rates, immigrants are going to be more and more important for filling those labor gaps
Okay.
and supporting things like Social Security.
Right.
So how well we integrate immigrants will be crucial to the economy.
Yeah.
But these demographic shifts, they're going to create challenges too.
How so?
Well, in areas where there's already a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, more newcomers could lead to tension.
Social and political tension.
Social and political tension, exactly.
So managing those anxieties, promoting tolerance and understanding.
Yeah,
That's going to be key.
absolutely, yeah. And the policy choices we make now are going to have a huge impact.
On the future of immigration.
On the future of immigration, yeah.
So we have to balance security concerns with economic needs
Right.
and our humanitarian values. It's a lot to consider.
It is. And the article wraps up by offering recommendations for creating a fairer and more effective immigration system.
Okay. What are some of those?
Well, a big one is a clear path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants.
Who are already here.
Yeah, who've established lives here.
Okay.
Expanding legal immigration to meet those labor demands
Mm-hmm.
and increasing support for refugee and asylum programs.
Okay.
And it argues that we need to address the root causes of migration.
Things we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Poverty, violence,
Right.
climate change,
Right.
to reduce that pressure on the system. And it emphasizes that immigration has always been a part of us.
Of our story.
Of our story, yeah. It's brought opportunities and challenges.
Stick to who we are.
Absolutely. It shaped our history, our culture, our identity. So, to really create a successful immigration system, we need to think about it from all angles. And one really crucial part of that is addressing why people are migrating in the first place.
Right. Those root causes we keep coming back to.
Exactly.
Economic hardship, violence, and increasingly climate change.
Yeah, and the article really argues that just focusing on border enforcement, that's not enough.
It's not going to solve the problem.
No, it's way more complicated than that. We need a combination of things: foreign aid, diplomacy, working with other countries.
To kind of alleviate those pressures that are pushing people to leave.
Yeah, exactly. Create more stability, more opportunities in those sending countries, so maybe people won't feel like they have to leave in the first place.
Right. It's a more proactive approach.
Exactly,
Yeah.
more preventative.
And the article also talks about how important public perception is.
Mm-hmm. Public perception and political will.
Yeah, because that really shapes policy.
It does. Misinformation, fear-mongering, that kind of divisive rhetoric, it gets in the way of finding good solutions.
Humane solutions.
Right. So we need a more informed discussion about immigration, one that's based on facts, not fear.
And that fosters empathy and understanding.
Exactly. Then we can start to create policies that reflect our values.
And our needs as a nation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, immigration has always been part of the American story.
It's shaped who we are.
It really has. Our economic growth, our culture, our diversity.
And as we move forward, we have to find that balance between security, economic opportunities, and humanitarian value.
Yeah, we need to find that common ground
Build consensus.
and create an immigration system that's fair and effective.
And reflects, the best of who we are.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has really been fascinating.
It has. Immigration is such a complex issue.
It is, but it's so important to understand.
It is. And it's going to continue to shape our country for years to come.
So as you think about this issue, remember, it's multifaceted. Think about all those different angles, all those different perspectives.
Yeah, and how it's influenced our past, our present, and our future.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.